everybody. So usually I make some technical presentations, so this one is very different. I'll make a technical one later. So as we have said, in Lithuania I'm kind of talking to a lot of mappers in person. In a pub, in live, I'm also doing presentations, not like in these international conferences, but also in Lithuanian conferences, so people also talk to me to talk about OpenStreetMap. So this presentation is kind of food for thought for you. What I listen, what I see about mapping, about different reasons and purposes, why do people map, and what possible collisions I do observe in all of this. Okay, so let's start with the purpose of a mapping. Right? So the most simple one, let's start with practical uses. Okay? So the most simple one is people, for practical reasons, decide that we want to enter some general information about a map. So general information is things which we use on almost every map, like street, houses, forest, and stuff like that. So this is the most simple part, because the only problem you could get is that everything is mapped. So we are already in that place. So maybe around my house everything is mapped. But if you go for practical reasons further, then people would use some maybe map, maybe some application, and they want to help that application or map, maybe improve that. So what we would do in that case, we would investigate which data is used actually to create that map or in that application, and then we'll go on and improve that particular data which is used in that application. And if we go to very hardcore, and maybe we have our own idea, we are creating our own new map, creating a new application. In that case, people would have to investigate which data, which additional data would be required for that purpose. Because the general data would usually be used as is, but you will need some thematic data. Because usually you would not be creating map as general map. You want to create map for bicycles, for kayaking, for, I don't know, flying, for birds, for protected territories, something like that. So we need to investigate which data would be used in that application. And then people often forget about that from the beginning, but what we have to do is we have to think if that data can actually go into OpenStreetMap database. Or alternatively, maybe we have to keep it somewhere separately. So the reasons could be legal part. Some information you would be collecting, if you are collecting, usually that can go to the OpenStreetMap, but if it's not possible to collect and you are kind of getting data set from somebody else, we need to check if that data could go into OpenStreetMap database. And another thing which is quite often forgotten is if the data will be stable in that OpenStreetMap. Now, what I mean by that is usually, especially from government agencies, we think that maybe we can avoid, like, buying that RJS license with database, and let's put all our data in OpenStreetMap and it will be there. And we kind of forget that, yes, that data is in OpenStreetMap, and maybe somebody will improve that data, but maybe somebody will damage the data. Maybe other people would have different understanding of that data and change it not in a way which you like it to be. So that has to be considered. And if all of that goes okay, and those people would go and collect that missing data and create their application. Now when we go to a different side, like when people just map for joy. So it's much more simple. Maybe some people just want to map. They don't care what they're mapping, just we have some spare time. Some people, when we have spare time, we would read a book, ride a bike, go and wash your neighbor's dishes, do something like that. And some would say that I just want to map. So they just want to do something, maybe with their friends, so spend their time. It could also be that it is an assignment in school or university, but that's more or less like a gray area because it's not necessarily for joy, and it could also be a practical one. But the point here is that you are mapping just for the sake of mapping. You usually do not care of what is the result. So these are kind of two poles of what we have. So what are the problems which I would observe this? So when we go about practical uses, so the most usual one is that people choose some application map and decide, oh, if I add this data, it would be cool if that would be displayed on that application or map. And the problem is that that application or map is not actually using that data, and they are not even considering of using that data. And also, it's like people think that if I enter some data, that this data would necessarily be used. So unfortunately, that is not usually the case. And some kind of similar situation is that people think of some hypothetical app, like okay, let's collect this data, and then in that case you will be able to create this and that and some magic stuff, and it would have to be created usually by somebody else. Or maybe me, but not now, because now I have to finish my beer, then I have summer vacation and stuff, so sometime later. And in my practice, that sometime later usually never comes. So that's also, I see as a problem, because usually people kind of would be wasting their time. Another thing is that when collecting data which decided you need, people do not always think about if they will be able to collect data for considerable part. Because if you think that, okay, I'll just map, I don't know, benches or trash boxes around my neighborhood, that's cool, you can create that map in your neighborhood, right? But if it's not filled on a wider area, and you are creating heterogeneity of data, and somebody who will be looking at your area would think that, okay, OpenStreetMap has this perfect data of benches, right? And they would expect that data to be everywhere else. They will go to different cities and there will be no data about benches, right? So that is also important. And you have to understand that you have to take care of that data which you decide to enter. And by take care, I mean people usually forget, not forget, but do not think what happens to the data after you put it into the database, right? If you went through all the city and collected all, I don't know, pubs, restaurants, some data, you have to think that in half a year, in a year, the data will be different. Some points would be removed, some points, new points would be added, and stuff. So you have to take care of the data and check that it is still up to date. It's not kind of automatically updated. And it goes together with a point that will other people want to take care of your data, right? So it is very good if you come up with an idea of data which is useful for a lot of people, and a lot of people want to collect the data, take care of that data. But it's not always the case. Not all data sets are like that. So you have to think about that as well. And if other people do not care about that data, it could also be the case that they would be not necessarily on purpose, but they could be damaging the data because they just do not care about it. And if you go for the joy part, So as the purpose is just having fun, so we had fun and done some mapping. So the problem is more like psychological. Is it actually not important for a person who is doing mapping for joy, for the data to be used? And this comes actually from my practice. On a number of occasions, there would be people coming up to me and saying, Thomas, I have installed this or another data collecting app, and I went and collected information about all, curbs in my neighborhood. And I will be, oh, very good, thank you. But actually inside I would be thinking, okay, but I know nobody is actually using that data. So that is an important thing to consider if that joy is actually just a joy, or people are thinking that I hope somebody will use my data. And it goes into all these collecting apps. I in the beginning wrote here a street map, street complete, but currently there are a plethora of different maps helping you to add those missing details. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying don't use those apps, but you just have to kind of think about it. Like years ago, I would be almost each year posting in Lithuanian OpenStreetMap list of street complete tasks which are actually used in our products, in some maps of ours, and saying that these are actually used. So add those if you want some practical ones, and these are just for fun. If you want to have fun, just like you are in a city and you want to go somewhere, you can just open Street Complete and it asks you, go check that car. Okay, let's go check that car. If that is what you want to do, fine, but just understand that it's not used in any app. So in the last years, I stopped doing that because, for example, Street Complete currently has so many tasks which enter data, which is absolutely, for me, pointless. So you have to think about it. With this joy thing is probably it would be good that people who want to map for joy would have some guidance. Those apps actually, with Street Completes and the likes, should be doing that, but somehow there was some bad turn and it ended up not doing that. So these are one kind of problems, but when we go into more hard problems which could happen is when mappers would be breaking some existing products. Yeah? So you have data in OpenStreetMap, and it is used by some maps, web applications, maybe some documents are written about that, and people, especially when they are mapping for joy, because they do not think about that practical use, they would usually do not think about possibility that the changes were actually breaking some other products. So you have to be very careful about that. And it's not always direct damage. Sometimes it could be simply overcomplicating data, right? For example, you can be adding some micro details that people would be looking around and looking at some general data would not see some obvious mistakes because of that overabundance of data. Or it could be complexity of the data, so you can be adding, like too many nodes, or like you have some grass point and you're entering as separate polygons, each 1 by 1 meter grass plot. And as I say, it would complicate validation and changing of the data, of other data, which could be like more broadly used. And once again, we can come up to the point when we add data which is not wanted by anybody else. And here we come to my main slide. This is what I was thinking about last 10 years or so. So on one side we have this freedom, right? And as in OpenStreetMap we have this rule like any tag you like and whatever you want you enter here, and this is very good. I'm all for it. I think that is the strength of OpenStreetMap. But the problem is that this is freedom, this is community and stuff, but somehow, besides that, we are always comparing our OpenStreetMap or OpenStreetMap-based products with some practical applications. We're not when did you hear somebody would be comparing how many mapping parties we have created, comparing to mapping parties or parties done by some commercial data provider ABC. We're not comparing this part. We're comparing this part. How many places of interest does map A has? How is the routing in web application B done compared to OpenStreetMap? So basically, we're kind of happy with this, but we want this one. And my point is an observation that we have opposing interests. So this one wants freedom, no rules, no structure. And that one, if you want to create actual working product, you need to have a hard structure and some stable rules. Right? So this is kind of opposing one another. So these are my suggestions, which I tell other people when they ask me, Thomas, what should I map? So it's not like this is what you should do, this is what I usually answer when people ask me. So usually I would say that choose what's important for you. Right? Choose if you like cycling, do something for cycling. If you like beer, do something for beer. If you like, I don't know, history, so go map Hilford. And also think what you actually use. Right? So if there is some OpenStreetMap related thing which you would like to use in your real life, so do that, so that you could add some data, modify some data, and actually use it in your real life. It will give you much more joy. And then check which data is actually used by that application or your application, so that you would not be working on something without any purpose. And then I would always reiterate the thing which I told, do not go in that hypothetical thing that if I do this, somebody will do something else. No, there is no somebody else. It's only you. And do not change any existing rules. Do not break any existing things. And then the most important thing is do and continue doing it. Not do it once. Okay, so these are my thoughts about these two poles of purpose of mapping. There is no universal solution, I think. Both of these poles are important. Both are here to be and both are to stay. So the most important thing is to talk. Usually, if you talk, you can always find solutions which would be acceptable to everybody. And think, right? And one of the most important things in think is that if you come up and see that all of the data is incorrect, and you think that now I'll correct everything, think about it. Is it possible that everybody else was so stupid and entered incorrect data? It's only one you who see that the data is incorrect. So possibly you need to go to step one, talk. you need to clear up. So and never rush to do the changes. So that's all what I wanted to tell today.
Okay, thank you, Thomas. We don't have questions slide, but if anyone wants, so we can ask them right now. So does anyone have questions?
You mentioned the not coming in and thinking that everybody is stupid and I'll go and fix something. But it sometimes happens that data actually is slightly wrong, just that there is this historical inertia in changing it. So what's your take on that area where there certainly is a problem and somebody new comes in there eager to fix it, but it's not easy to do?
It cannot be that way. It cannot be that there is a problem, the solution is known, but nobody is doing anything. And there is that new person who's the only one wishing to do it. There should be some reasons, yeah, right? Why existing mappers are not changing it, right?
There are reasons, yeah. But it's wrong, but there are reasons why it's wrong.
But you see, it is wrong. It also goes into this graph of practical and joy part. Sometimes this wrong is, for me, less important if that other thing actually works. Okay, if something works, don't break it. So, as I like to say that you have to calculate the value. So if you change something to something new, you calculate how much new value you create by that change. But usually that change also has a cost, right? So if that cost is too large, for example, you will, change some tag to some better sounding tag, right? And but this means that a lot of people would have to change their products, maps, documentations. Then there's a question if it's actually worth it.
Okay, I have a weird question. So imagine regular people, not mappers like us. Somebody just lives somewhere and uses OpenStreetMap-based application and sees like a hotel is missing, or restaurant is missing, or a building doesn't have an address, and it fixes the address and never thinks about the map again. So this, I'm talking about things that happened like 10 years ago with maps.me, and I remember you were very opposed to it. So did your opinion about those one-off edits change, and how?
In my opinion, and this is not about OpenStreetMap, it's about ID. In ID, we do not have just functions, we have processes. Every function is somewhere in a process. So if we talk about that specific possibility to do a change, even a small one, for a person who does not understand what he's doing, then it's not a good process. For me, what would have to be done is that that person should either create a note with enough information so that our people would check that note and do the change according to that, or their changes have to be approved by somebody. So we would have to something like pull request of this address change, and somebody else reviews. Maybe it's just as simple as showing that change, and somebody else just presses a button apply, and only then that change goes into a database. For me, it's like that, because otherwise we would not have that practicality if everybody, even with their best intentions, would be changing whatever we want.
So, if anything, all those things you were talking about, how mapping should be in funds, how you can should map what interests you and see to completion, it still relies on people being there, looking at every note, looking at changes, and validating that other people do the right thing. Right?
It depends on the amount of changes you do, right? I think there used to be ideas that maybe we should have some kind of level of mappers. Like in the beginning, you can add and change points of interest. Later, you can change buildings, streets, and you kind of progress. So this would kind of make a practical check of what you are already able to do, so that you would not be jumping into changing operation, because that is one of the most usual things when we have to do reverses, when people with some good intentions want to change one point, I don't know, your mouse drags somehow incorrectly and you end up with all the neighborhood moving 1 kilometer away. So